there everyone, welcome back to Dan Cave and welcome to another video build, and this time it's the Eduard 48 scale Bf109F4. So 48 scale was never really my genre. Built a few over the years. It's been a few years since I built one. Had mainly focused on 72nd scale aircraft, a few 144 scale subjects, and then obviously cars and bikes and stuff, the other stuff you see on the channel regularly. But I thought it was time to go back and do some 48 scale. So picked this up at a hobby show, model show, a couple of years back. Started it in, I think, about January of last year. Kind of put on the back burner halfway through the year through just various other things keeping me busy. Finally got around to finishing it in December of last year. So I finally got all the footage together, did the editing, and now it's time for you to see how this build went. So before we go over to the action, a quick plea, please subscribe. If you like the video, give it a like, and feel free to leave a comment as well if you wish. Thank you all for your support. Put your feet up, sit back, and hopefully enjoy this build. I'll be back at the end for my final thoughts. So on we go. So this is the Profi Pack edition of the Bf109F4 from Eduard in 48 scale. So as with most aircraft kits, work's going to start first on a cockpit. So getting all the parts off the sprue, main cockpit components, the cockpit floor and rear bulkhead, instrument panel, any of the smaller pieces. Of course, being the Profi Pack, there is some PE included as well. Those parts are being removed from the PE fret with the Zuron PE cutters. And basically I'm building up the cockpit as is, not painting it or priming it until the majority of the components are put together. There are, of course, quite a few small bits of PE to be added in. Always quite a fiddly little task. And as you can see, that is the basis of the cockpit, built up with seat, pedals, control column, etc. So another important aspect of the cockpit is, of course, the sidewalls. So that means getting some work done on the fuselage halves. So once removed from the sprue, sprue attachment points cleaned up with a file. So the tub itself, that's been primed in UMP black primer. And that will form a nice base for the next stage of painting it. So again, because the cockpit parts are made up, already glued together, do need to make sure you get all the angles covered, get in all the kind of nooks and crannies of that cockpit tub. So once the primer's had plenty of curing time, it's time to go back in with Revell number 77, which is a good substitute for RLM 66. So that's sprayed using the H&S Infinity, with the paint itself from Revell being thinned with UMP's Universal Acrylic Thinners. So as you can see, I'm building up that dark grey colour, trying to allow some of the underlying black primer to show through as well. Now once that RLM 66 is cured, there's a little bit of detail painting. And then of course the PE seat belts provided by Eduard are added as well. So they need to be glued in place and then folded over into, we'll say, a natural looking pose for some seat belts. So they're already pre-painted from Eduard on a pre-painted PE fret. And of course, should you wish, you can add some further paint details as well if necessary. So once all that's nicely cured, I'm going to add a dark wash from Ammo MIG, just to highlight any of the recessed areas in around any of the panels and any of the control features. That can get cleaned up with some Sansador, and then I'm adding some dark brown pigment from Revell. Again, just to pick out any areas of wear and tear, dirt, etc. on the inside of the cockpit. So once that step is completed, I can now glue that interior tub inside the fuselage half, the instrument panel itself with its PE panel attached as well. That can also be added in. And once they're cured in place, I can then glue the two fuselage halves together using Tamiya Extra Thin. So of course at this stage the actual pace of progress can pick up on the major assembly. Things like the horizontal tailplane, the rudder, the elevators, all those parts can be added. They are of course posable as well from Eduard because they're supplied as separate parts. And certainly on the elevators, make sure you get the posing of them somewhat symmetrical. That's just a case of adding some Tamiya Extra Thin. So then of course the wings come as 3 parts, 2 upper wing sections and 1 continuous lower wing section. So once again, these parts are removed from the sprue using the Tamiya side cutters. Any of those sprue attachment points are cleaned up using a file. There's also some landing gear bay parts to be installed as well. So again, Tamiya Extra Thin is the glue of choice in this case. And of course, having the undercarriage bays does add a nice amount of depth and detail to the landing gear area. So once I'm happy those internal parts are in place, I can run some Tamiya Extra Thin along the join between these parts, and capillary action will allow it to flow along and will adequately secure those parts together. And if necessary, of course, they can be clamped in place as well. And so with that part completed, the wing section can now be added to the fuselage. And once again, it's Tamiya Extra Thin is just allowed to flow into the joints and give it a secure fix. So as you can see, the majority of the airframe is already building up. You can now add in the PE components for the radiators. Those parts will just slot into place and get secured using some CA glue, after which the covers can then be added. And the covers are secured using Tamiya Extra Thin. So as with the elevators, the ailerons and flaps can also be added at this stage. The inboard flaps, of course, are double flap on the 109. So certainly some careful adjustment and positioning needs to be made to make sure they adequately represent the flap configurations. So once all those parts are nicely in place, any sanding, any cleaning of seam lines, a little bit of rescribing, it's time to head on over and start priming the airframe. So like with the cockpit tub, UMP black primer is the primer of choice. And there's about 2 coats of that are going to get laid down to give a nice basis. First of all, to check for any issues with any seam lines, because the black primer in matte will reveal any problems whatsoever. Luckily enough, my seam work appears to have been reasonably good, and I can just stick with the 2 black coats. Now, the scheme for this particular aircraft is RLM 76, 70, 75, 76 on the bottom, which I mix up using a mixture of Revell 49 and some white. Not really an issue to have this a little bit lighter than you need, because of course it's going down over a black primer, and it will be sprayed in, we'll say, a kind of patchy mottled appearance, again to give some kind of tonal variation to that underside paint. Once I'm happy with the level of color variation, I can then blend it together with almost like a complete top coat. And of course, don't forget the undercarriage doors as well, because they will be in the underside color as well. So once that paint is cured, so I'm going to use some Tamiya, I think it's 2mm tape, to make the main demarcation for the upper camouflage. which is in RLM 70 and 75. And that just saves having unsightly overspray on the lighter RLM 76. So I'm going to speed up the footage of adding the RLM 75, which is the first colour that's added. So generally with camouflage, try and go with the lighter colour first. It's generally easier to paint darker colours over lighter colours. And I'm not strictly following any camouflage scheme at this stage, because all I'm trying to do is basically lay down the lighter colour, and I'll then go back and mask that. Which then, of course, that complete masking will be used to lay out the camouflage for the darker RLM 70. So I have gone for a hard edge on the camo by using masking tape. As you can see, that's fully laid out for the RLM 70 colour to be applied. Once again, I'm going to speed up this footage and show the RLM 70 colour, grey-green colour being applied. So both the upper colours were used as the RLM 70-75 equivalent from the Revell acrylics range, thinned with the UMP universal thinners and sprayed on using the H&S Infinity with the 0.15 nozzle. So once all that masking tape is removed, I can then go back and add any of the mottling effects, which spread down the side of the fuselage. Once again, starting with the RLM 75. And then subsequently coming in with the RLM 70. Now, of course, one of the issue areas with acrylic paints is they do have a tendency to cause tip dry. For this type of mottling, generally lacquers will be much easier to control and get very precise demarcations. But for the mottled effect I'm looking for on this, the acrylics through the 0.15 H&S are absolutely fine. As you can see, adding them in, it does actually give quite a good effect. So once all that's cured, it's back to add some more masking, some white primer, and that's to cover the yellow under engine colour and the yellow rudder as well. And that yellow is chosen once again from Revell's acrylic range. So again, by kind of building up that white and that yellow, I'm not trying to look for a very, I suppose, for a perfect yellow finish. I do want a little bit of tonal variation in there as well. So once all those paints are fully cured, it's time to move on to the decaling process. So, decals from Eduard, a little bit disappointed with them. The carrier film was very, very visible, which was a little bit irritating. I think it did spoil the final view of the kit, which we'll have a look at later. But certainly through the decal process, even with copious amounts of UMP strong and even a little bit of extra strong used, the decal film did silver quite badly and showed up quite readily on the kit. So that was a little bit of a disappointing side to this build, but nonetheless, all the decals were added. Adherence was absolutely fine. Just that silvering around the actual carrier film was a little bit annoying. And of course, here you can see me trying to use some UMP extra strong to try and get them to blend in a little bit better. So with the decal set aside, it's time to move on to painting a lot of the ancillary parts like the landing gear, and as shown here, the propeller. Once again, Revell's acrylic range was used for the appropriate RLM 40 spinner and propeller blades.
And for me, these paints lay down absolutely beautifully, this time being shot through the Iwata Neo airbrush that I've got. So then there's a little bit of masking up of the main undercarriage bays. And again, using the Iwata Neo, an appropriate gear bay color is then used for those areas, which I think is once again RLM 77. Sorry, RLM 66 using Revell 77. So once that stage is complete, I'm going to use some Tamiya dark iron and a sponge just to add some chipping effects, mainly in and around the cockpit entry point, trailing edge of the wing, and a few other select areas. So not a huge amount of weathering on this aircraft, certainly not a huge amount of chipping. Once that dark iron is done, I'm infilling some of the bits using Revell aluminium, which is Revell 99, just to give that kind of dual layer effect to any of the chipped areas. Once that paint is completely cured, I'm going to go back in, use a UMP dark wash, MIG Ammo dark wash, which is an enamel wash, just to fill in any of the panel lines. Once again, just add a little bit of depth. Given that I didn't clear coat it, you will get a certain amount of staining from the enamel wash. That can actually be quite useful and enhance the kind of weathered look of the airframe. So you're not just getting that fine flow along the panel line that you would on a gloss finish. So as you can see, I'm kind of needing to brush my way through all the panel lines because given it's a matte paint finish, the actual wash doesn't flow quite as well as it would on a gloss finish. So once all those panel lines have been cleaned up, I'm using some UMP water-based washes, so clay-based washes, through the airbrush just to add some exhaust staining, using a mixture of dark dirt. I think I'm also using the concrete as well to add a little bit of a lighter grey colour. So through the airbrush that goes down reasonably heavy, and I use some UMP dirt, UMP earth actually, on the underside. Again, just to add some dirt and staining to the underside of the airframe. So again, through the airbrush produces quite a stark effect. Once that's fully cured, it's back over to the desk with a little bit of water and some kitchen roll just to clean up any of the areas, remove any of the excess, and using a brush dipped in some water also to blend down any of that stained area. As you can see, there's quite a lot of the UMP wash has actually been removed, but it does leave quite a good effect. So then the addition of the remainder of the components, things like the canopy, the aerial on the canopy as well, the undercarriage doors. As you can see, I've just managed to knock one of them off. So that can be added back on with a little bit of CA glue. And that pops in place absolutely perfectly. And of course, with all those additions, that's basically the kit complete. Now it's time to look at the final photos. So overall, I have to admit, I'm very, very pleased with the outcome of this kit. I think the paint went down well. The real disappointment, and it's quite obvious in the photos, is those decals. The Eduard Decal film, very, very visible in these shots. This is after numerous attempts with Decal solutions. It just does not resolve. But however, I'm still pleased with the outcome. So let's head back over to me for final thoughts.
So there we have it. That's the Bf109 F4 from Eduard, 48 scale Profi Pack edition. Really enjoyable build. The kit itself is, well, I suppose the mouldings itself are at least 12 years old, I reckon, from looking on scale mates. they show a little bit of age, there's a little bit of flash, there's a little bit of cleanup, but generally the entire build went absolutely brilliantly. A little bit of filler, wing roots, kind of typical things. The fit was maybe not as perfect as some newer kits have or some other manufacturers produce, but either way, that the corrections were fairly minimal. So thoroughly enjoyable build. An iconic aircraft from World War II. An iconic decal scheme as well in some ways. So yeah, kind of enjoyed my building process through this. Good chance to do a little bit of mottling as well. The kit itself, as I said, a few kind of age related issues, probably related to the moldings. Main issue I had was actually the decals from Eduard. They were a little bit of a disappointment. They didn't go down particularly well. I think it's first time in a long time I've used Eduard decals, actually. Yeah, it's been quite a few years since I've used any of their decals. So it could have been user error, maybe the way I applied them. Worth revisiting on another kit at some point, but certainly the finish on the decals was the main area I was disappointed with. Other than that, the build went absolutely spot on. Really enjoyed it. Level of detail in the cockpit is good. The Profi pack, of course, you get the photo etch. You get the canopy masks as well, which are really useful. So little additions like that do make it kind of worthwhile, and they're pretty much a bargain of a kit as well. So that's it. That's my conclusion. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, and don't forget to leave a comment down below as well if you wish. And thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all very, very soon. So bye bye for now.